All right, guys, here we are in the Quiggin Out MMA podcast. This is episode 5, and as you can see, I have two guests once again. These guys are near and dear to me. They're two of my closest, oldest friends for the better part of a decade. Nick Ramirez up at the top, Art Reed's down at the bottom. How you doing, gentlemen?
Good, good.
Fantastic.
So, Art and I got talking the other day, and we really decided to kind of start the conversation about UFC fighters who have gone to the WWE and vice versa. But I want to back it up and really start with Nick and then Art, and then I'll do myself. Do myself.
Didn't know it was that kind of show.
Really talk about what got you into any sort of sports entertainment, whether it was MMA first or wrestling, and how you got to where you are today. So we'll start with Nick.
All right. Definitely wrestling before MMA. Very young, can't recall the age, of course, but it was the Heart Foundation, the British Bulldogs, Hulk Hogan, of course, his transition to movies, watching those too. And it was that larger than life persona, lifestyle, $1 Million Man. Come on, all of that. I just in amazement of watching that, and just overall athleticism too. It was the first time you really, or at least I really saw people just jumping off of top ropes and steel cages and all of this. I was like, that's not basketball. That's not baseball. And that sure as hell ain't football. But
And then Art will talk about, what started you, because I know you actually know exactly when it started. So
Yeah, I know when it started. I was 4. My dad was really big into wrestling, and Hulk Hogan was my guy. He's not any longer. I'm just throwing that out there. But like Hulk Hogan was a superhero when I was a kid. He was a real life superhero. He body slammed Andre the Giant. And then as I got older, I started to like Bret Hart more. Bret Hart's still my boy. But like it's the over the top personalities that really were grabbing me. Because even Bret Hart still has an over the top personality if you really think about it.
Well, he had that fan that attacked him and that whole thing. So.
Exactly. But I would say it's over the top personalities. Then the athleticism and stuff too. Like as we got into the cruiserweights and stuff like that, that kind of stuff stuck me. But it's always the personalities that kind of stick me there. And it's kind of the same with MMA too. I'm drawn to the guys with the big personalities that are not just walking in and leaving after they're done,
Mm-hmm. And for me as well, like my dad showed me wrestling, and I was actually only allowed to watch WCW because it was the cleaner of the two.
Hey, Nitro, come on.
Yeah.
It depends which WCW. If it's 2000 WCW, no.
Yeah, that's true. No. Bad video games, bad.
And I had to be somewhere in the range of 8 to 10, somewhere in that field. And I remember being able to like wait till they left the room. Sorry, Dad. And I'd switch over to WWF because it'd be on at the same time and switch it back. But for me, it was, and Sting ended up being the guy, and it was the persona thing. It was the mystery. It was you never knew what he was going to do, where he was going to come from, what was going to happen. And I think unknowingly that built my love for MMA because it was actually Nick who really brought me into the depth of MMA. We're talking 11 years ago. And we would go to his house and watch Pride for 6 hours at a time. And he'd go, this fight's whack. This fight's whack. No. Watch this one. Watch this one. And I just remember like falling in love with it. And it was like falling in love with wrestling all over again. Because wrestling had gotten stale. It had gotten to the point where it's the same storylines. It was the same people. It was predictable. And it really wasn't what it used to be, and I think that was because we were kids. We were watching this going, yeah, this is great. And then you see, like you said, Hogan body slamming the Giant. I'm pretty sure Sting body slammed the Giant.
He always said
the Giant instead of Andre the Giant.
Yeah. He didn't slam Andre.
No. But how did your shift change? And I know Art, yours might not have at this point, but the fact that you even watch MMA is pretty cool. But
Yeah.
how did yours shift from wrestling to MMA? Like Nick, what was your go-to there?
Oh man, it was. What was the first? Seeing, I would say, seeing the first couple UFCs, on like DVD and stuff like that. But really, I was intrigued with that because I remember one of the fights they had. They marketed as a ninja fighting a like an Axeman. And I was like, what is this? So I figured, hey, this is like wrestling. You had the Goodwins and whoever else, some Japanese fighter, whoever coming in. So I was like, I'll watch this. And then I was like, okay, this is crazy because you see people like Keith Hackney just punching away at someone's face and they can't even defend. And you're like, whoa, this is real. But getting to the pinnacle of it was definitely Pride was in better hands early on than UFC was. Pre-Dana White, of course, with competition, with names, with different backgrounds of real trained martial artists.
Well, and Pride had the glam. It had the show. The production that came with it.
So, bam, 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 dum, 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 dum. Who does it hit on and just get the hell up out of bed and just go, yeah!
Yeah, right? You're like, I don't even know who's coming out.
But yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And watching a couple of those fights, I mean, the Igor Vachachin knockout, I mean, come on. Just pop, 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 pop. Like the guy was out, just asleep, and got knocked out again, asleep. I mean, that was great.
And he just made, I'm going to plug James Lynch because I can. He just did a top 5 best fighters outside the UFC, like who never got signed, and Igor actually made the list.
Absolutely.
And I was like, finally. So, and then Art, for you, like, how did you get into it? Was it the fact that all of us talked about it at nauseum, or what's it?
Well, that's part of it, but it's also it's one of those things. Like, it's not that I was completely unaware of MMA before, because you got to understand, my grandfather had a black box for pay-per-view when I was a kid, so I watched a lot of the early UFC fight events and stuff. I had no idea what's going on, but yes, a ninja versus whatever was pretty much what dominated it. And I'm like, well, if I'm going to watch that, Bret Hart's right over here, I could just watch that. So, but what really got me into actually paying more attention to it was when one of the subjects we're going to talk about later, Brock Lesnar, went into the UFC. And I'm like, no, I have to watch this, because what is Brock going to do to these guys, these real, like athletes and everything.
And I mean, I think that's as good a segue as any, because I was still watching wrestling when Brock was around, and I hated him. Hated him.
That's understandable.
So going to the UFC, I was like, all right, he's gonna get his ass kicked like this.
Yeah.
This isn't even gonna be a contest, and you forget about at that moment that he actually has a legitimate wrestling background.
Yeah, he's a 2-time NCAA heavyweight champion. Like, he is an actual wrestler. It's playing it, but it's the same thing as if like Kurt Angle went into the UFC. He's a real wrestler.
Yeah. Plus,
and
he has
monster.
that time that he spent on the Vikings. I don't know. Didn't he get cut before the season?
He got cut. He did some preseason games, if I remember correctly. He wasn't bad. It's just he hasn't played since like middle school, probably. So like,
it was just the next natural progression.
Yeah.
So talk about the intrigue that came with that, because Brock was dominant from the get-go, really. He was a force to be reckoned with. So how did you feel about him going to the UFC? Do you feel like that was a bad move for him at the time? No, not knowing what you know now, but at the time, do you feel like that was a bad?
No, because I think he's going to be okay. You know what I mean? Like, if I feel like if he puts his mind to something, he's that kind of freak that he's going to pull it off, if that makes sense. Because, he was probably like 25, 26, something like that, and hadn't picked up a football since middle school, and got a walk-on with the Vikings, and was playing in preseason games.
Yep.
So, and also, he never watched pro wrestling before he did it, but they signed him, and then within 2 years, he's the heavyweight champion of the world. Like, you can't... that you can't.
Well,
Putting
Paul Heyman.
Yeah, but it's just like he's a monster. He was what 6'5", probably 300 pounds when he went into WWF, and that's.
Thank you
crazy.
for calling it the WWF. Thank you.
I'm not calling it the other one. That one's stupid.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
the
that's very
WWF. I'm sorry.
World Wildlife
But-
Foundation and World
Yeah.
Wrestling Federation, two different.
It's the World Wrestling Federation.
Yes.
But when he came in, when he was going to the UFC, I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. But oh yeah, that's right. He's a two-time NCAA heavyweight champion. He's
Division
going to
one.
wreck somebody. So I thought it was a good move for him in the long run. Because even if he failed, he's still going to make millions of fake dollars, basically.
And
True.
yeah, and then Nick, your reaction to it. Obviously, I gave mine. Art was excited about it, but
Oh, I'll tell you, I'll be excited about it too. I mean, I completely agree. Wrestling has been, still to this day, the number one base to have in MMA. 8 times out of 10, I will say, let me go down a little. 7 times out of 10, it'll be Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm sorry. I do apologize. No disrespect to any BJJ practitioners. That's a hell of a defense and offensive technique. But we've seen it time and time again. And you throw 30 pounds on top of everybody else into that, you got to mix for success. Come on. Bring the people around. I mean, he put Mir down and just sat on him, and I mean, he could do anything he wanted to do to the guy. He wasn't even a puncher. He has never been a puncher or a striker in the UFC. He bloodied Frank Mir.
the second time. I'm talking about the first time. That
No,
was
the
the
first
good
time
fight.
he didn't expect that. He didn't expect that. That's okay. Chalk it off to ring rust, if you want to say, or octagon rust.
Well, fun fact
Yes.
for most people that don't know, Brock Lesnar's second fight was supposed to be against Mark Coleman,
Oh yeah, that would have been great.
and it ended up being against Heath Herring. And if you watch that fight, he literally just runs straight across, and he does
Oh, yeah.
what Brock did well.
Chucked him like a rock on water,
Mhm.
and then went to town. I mean, but think about the weight advantage he had on him. Crazy, against Crazy Horse.
Yeah.
He's at like almost 60 pounds.
I mean, I don't know if he had that much on him. Heath Herring was probably a good 230, 240.
Yeah, I'd say Crazy Horse was always a light heavyweight, not really a heavyweight in my opinion. My opinion. But I think that weight advantage definitely helped in a lot of situations.
So did you think when Brock got in, both of you, did you think Brock was going to make it to championship status? Did you
Yes.
think he was going to? Yeah.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah. Once he passed the test of Frank Mir, I was like, here we go. I mean, he got fed some scrubs right away, and that's
Well, he got fed an older Randy Couture, and nothing against Randy. Nothing.
No, yeah.
But you have a 1-1 record, and they give you
Yeah.
a title shot.
And a guy who's been a big light heavyweight, a small heavyweight.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
But
So-
yeah, absolutely. I don't think there is any doubt he was going to succeed. Because again, as I said, whatever this freak sets his mind to, he's able to do. Like, I don't know what it is, but anything athletically, he just does it. Period. So I knew he was going to get there eventually. It was just going to be a matter of when. Is he going to have to do 3 fights, 5 fights, 10 fights? He would have gotten it eventually.
Yeah.
And I think what's ironic is that, he ends up losing the title to Cain Velasquez, which you and I both were there to watch that. We called that. I know that's your guy. So
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
and then
Go ahead. I'm
they
sorry.
bring
Go ahead.
him into the WWE. So, and he's, I want to get some thoughts on that because I feel like we both kind of, like all three of us probably have the same feeling about it, that they brought it in just because of that fight. But do you feel it was justified to bring him in and make him part of the storyline?
No.
No,
I'm very against people from real sports, I'm going to put it that way, that basically go into wrestling and then
Mr.
have
T.
one match and then leave. Yeah, Mr. T. But the difference is Mr. T, if you go back and watch Mr. T, he didn't do anything. He was
No, I
basically
know, but
doing
that was-
amateur moves and stuff like that. But like,
people complaining about him.
no, I'm just saying, like, he did amateur moves and then would tag in Hogan, and then the 6'7", 300-pound guy would do stuff. Like, but that's fine. I had a problem when I was a kid when LT came in and fought Bam Bam. I'm like, what?
Oh.
Why?
Yeah.
It's like, so this guy's a real athlete, but that guy's not a real athlete? Like, that doesn't work. So I think it just devalues the WWF, like, stock, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It does make sense. Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, we've got the 4 big ones that we're going to talk about. We already talked about Lesnar, but we have, guys like Ken Shamrock, CM Punk, and Dan the Beast Severn. Who could forget the man who went almost 50 fights without somebody actually stopping him via strikes, who has over 100 MMA fights to his record, which is terrifying.
Yes.
And I'm sure today he could still mess somebody up.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. He would mind. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I saw him and somebody was like, you should fight, no.
I'm good. I'll buy him a coffee. He is good. Yeah.
So, keeping on the track of, people who were successful going from wrestling to the UFC, we're going to go to Ken Shamrock, who really before my MMA, I only knew him as, Ken Shamrock, the world's most dangerous man, as the wrestler. So it was, really interesting to go through the journey and see Ken being a part of those early UFC days, to see him get just beaten by guys smaller like Hoist Gracie, where you were like, what just happened? So what was your first introduction to Shamrock, and do you feel he capitalized on, going back and forth? Because he kind of did. He went back and forth between wrestling and mixed martial arts. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
But like the fun fact about Ken Shamrock is that he was a professional wrestler first before he went in the UFC. And like 1990-91, he was in Japan. I think I was telling you about this, Quiggins, where he started a group that was putting on supposed to be real fights because they thought that's what people wanted. And then eventually he started in the UFC, and he's like, I don't have to pretend to fight anymore. Mm-hmm. But I think overall, Shamrock had a fantastic career in the WWF. He's still wrestling, which kind of makes me sad, but he, in the WWF Intercontinental Champion, he was fighting The Rock, and you can't get any bigger back then to go against The Rock. Yeah. And he was in storylines. He was a tag team champion. He was all kinds of... They treated him like a badass. You can't do any better than that. And he was the first TNA champion too. So I think without hitting the main event, which he really couldn't have back then because of Austin and The Rock and The Undertaker and stuff, he got about as high as you can. Yeah. Yep. So I think he did a really good job.
Nick?
They did definitely tied his ass to a rocket. They knew he was making money. They knew he was putting butts in seats at the UFC. All his fights with Tito Ortiz, etc. He had the big personality. He had actual, factual video proof of beating people up, submission fighting, etc. It was just it was an easy transition, my opinion, because of his psyche. He already knew how to deal with the fame and everything. And like you said, it was the Attitude Era. He was badass to begin with. Mm-hmm. And the WWF, saw something in him, which was absolutely...
Bleep that out. Bleep.
But one fun thing...
He could freaking do it. And, I just saw a match not too long ago. They were playing it on the network. It was him... Goldust, Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Oh yeah.
8-man tag match with the Hearts and the British Bulldog and all of that. He did a great job still. Yeah. And that was towards the end. I think somewhere in the middle of his career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But one fun fact I found out is that actually they had to get him used to not actually hitting people.
That's why they put the
Well, not just that. They put him in a feud first with British Bulldog, who can handle himself in a fight if anything to get too stiff. And then British Bulldog said, "No, I'm done working with him." With Vader, because they went bigger and a bigger, stronger guy. In one match, he broke 2 of Vader's ribs, blew out his knee, and broke his nose with a knee because he just was throwing everything, and eventually Vader got tired of it and swung a forearm and almost knocked Shamrock out because he just didn't know how to do it. So eventually got better, but like he was working with Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels and Stone Cold and like everybody. So I would say he knocked it out of the park with what he had.
And would you say, not just based on merit, do you feel like he was one of the more successful crossovers to be able, because, you know, Brock's doing it too. He, you know, wrestled UFC and now he's back at wrestling. You know, we know it was due to the health issues and the diverticulitis. We know that played a huge part in it. And I feel like Brock still had some potential because he was growing. I'm never going to deny he wasn't growing as an athlete. And like you said, he's a freak. He is somebody who you could put in almost any situation.
Easy to learn.
And he'll figure it out. So would you feel that if we had a poll of who was the more successful person who came out of it, would it be Lesnar or would it be Shamrock, based on their experience and what they did at the time?
Lesnar, I would say, because he won a title, went back. He could do it at any point. He can go back to UFC. You know what I mean? I think by the time Shamrock left the WWF, he was getting older by that point, and it was a different game, and he had used up pretty much like what stock he had left in UFC, and he can't go back to the WWF anymore, so he kind of just was taking glorified bum fights after a while, if that makes sense. Whereas in prime, I think Brock would kick the shit out of Ken Shamrock.
Well, of course.
I'm just throwing that out there. I'm just saying, overall, I'd say Brock had a better
Two different weight classes.
career as far as that goes.
Yeah.
Well,
I
and they were
go
different
ahead.
guys. No, I was gonna say they were two extremely different sized guys.
Yeah, I mean, like,
Well, no, but you get my point.
Yeah.
3 weight classes apart, considering what they were in.
I'm just saying.
I know.
I would like to see Ken Shamrock.
Hypothetical. Absolutely, Lesnar. Even if we take the athletics out of it, the guy has a mind for signing the right contract, baby. I mean, the dude can make money in his sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Could have one fight and make all of what Shamrock made in half, in almost his whole career in the UFC. Granted, too, when all of that came with him coming in, it was a totally different company at that time.
Mm-hmm.
You had sponsorships galore at that time, and you had a lot of money being paid to high draw people, whether they came from another fighting organization
Pay-per-view
or
points, man.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. But yeah, I think, in general, Ken Shamrock would have never been a top tier fighter, wrestler in the WWF. Just for the reason you said, he was always seen as a mid tier. But damn, he got as high as he could. And
oh yeah, he was scratching the bottom of the top.
Oh,
basically.
yeah.
He was right there. I think it's just the personality thing. Unfortunately, he's still better than other like UFC guys that come in, but they're still just, you can only go so far unless you're Brock Lesnar, basically.
Yep.
And he doesn't even have personality either. He's just there. He's a monster.
He barely has to talk. He just walks up and goes.
He has a manager to talk for him. So it's like if Paul Heyman was around when Ken Shamrock was, it would probably be the same exact situation.
I guarantee Ken probably wouldn't have even talked at all if he had someone like Peyton, because he would have been terrifying. And it was, that, I'll just throw out the Fiend aspect before, it was that unstoppable, unmovable force. And if he didn't talk, same thing with Lesnar. When Lesnar talks, sometimes you're like,
stop.
Yeah, just let your wrestling speak for it. So.
Another big difference, though, honestly, is it feels like Brock has protected his legacy a little bit more, if that kind of makes sense. Because I don't see Brock ever getting to the point where he's taking fights with like equivalent Kimbo Slice. You know what I mean?
Oh,
he doesn't need to. And if he did, he'd make enough in one fight to I'm done.
To be like, no, I'm good. I don't need to fight this scrub.
Yeah, it's just, I think he was probably better with his money. It's not so much even making more money. It's just, I'm sure something happened.
He's more intelligent than people give him credit for.
Yeah.
And also, from what a lot of the wrestlers say, very family orientated. He does not like being away from his family. He cares about them. And that's a big part of his career, too. That's why, technically, he signed a Legends contract before there was ever a Legends contract. Mm-hmm. Hey, all right, you're going to have more matches, but they're going to be like 5 minutes each. Oh, okay.
Yeah, right. This one, you got Goldberg. It's going to be about 45 seconds. That's it.
Yeah.
And you're going to make $1 million. Have fun.
Saudi Arabia's paying everything.
Yeah, and then you're going to beat him in 3 months, meaning this didn't matter whatsoever. So here's another $1 million.
It's like Disney. Yeah, throw it away.
Who cares?
I remember when Goldberg started and just being like, oh my God. And it's like watching him now, I'm like, it's kind of like watching, and I'm going to say this, and this hurts. And Nick, you'll understand why. It's like watching BJ Penn fight.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I can't do it anymore. It's just bad.
Yes.
That was painful to say out loud, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
But, so we talked about the successful side of it. You know, obviously Lesnar and Shamrock, super successful. We're going to kind of focus on two guys who didn't quite make the transition as well. And I don't think it was, you know, I don't want to be disrespectful to one of them, but just knowing that you got hurt more than professional wrestling than you did in fighting tells me something.
Yeah, it does.
So, you know, we'll start out with, you know, we'll save Dan Severn for last, obviously.
Okay.
You know, CM Punk, dynamic wrestler, definitely one of those personalities that, you know, we're talking about. Somebody who captivated you, somebody who drew you to the crowd, who could play the heel, who could play the babyface, and go back and forth seamlessly like it was nothing. When he first announced he was going to start doing MMA, do you remember what your reaction to that was?
Bad plan. Very bad plan. No, because, like, okay, if 10 years ago Kurt Angle said, I'm going to go in the UFC, I would have been like, okay, he's crazy enough to find a way to pull this off because he won an Olympic medal with a broken neck. So, like, he will figure it out. When Brock said, I'm like, okay, this is another legitimate, serious athlete who's going to figure this out. CM Punk, I don't think, did anything athletic before he became a wrestler. I don't think. He wasn't a wrestler. He's into, what is it, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? If I remember correctly.
Yeah.
He's into that, but it's still not like anything fighting-wise. I would take Bret Hart in the dungeon over with CM Punk.
Hell yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't... I thought, bad plan. This is just going to make everybody look bad. It's going to make him look bad because he was, 33, 34 or something like that? He was getting up there, and he was...
Steroid prime.
Exactly.
But nothing else.
Yeah, pretty much.
So for you, Nick, do you remember that?
Yeah. I do. I was one of those that said, you know, give him a shot. You never know. He could have been a virtuoso. You know, they could have put him on that mat, and he would have been like, bam, boom, boom, boom. And they were like, whoa, how'd you get this? How'd you do that? Great. And then he fought a dude who, like, won on, what was it? The Contender Series, right?
It was the Contender Series. I think it was before. It was Dana White's Looking for a Fight.
There we go. I couldn't think of the name.
With him and Matt Serra.
Matt Serra's awesome.
Shout out Matt Serra.
Yeah, shout out. But and then he had that fight, and it was just an ass whooping from I mean a middle level contender. You know, Diego beat him, but I'm talking about the fighter he was fighting.
Yeah, Mickey Gall.
Yeah, Mickey Gall. But Mickey Gall he was saying he had the flu, he wasn't feeling right, etc. You know, so I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. It was pretty bad. Then they said, okay, you know what? We're going to give you someone else who I didn't really know. I didn't check the record. I would assume he was at the same level, if not a little lower.
Yeah, Mike Jackson.
Yeah, and then he got beat again, and it was just as bad. And again, he was starting very late in his career. It's hard to learn all of that late. Nowadays, you have to be multifaceted in martial arts. You can't just have a wrestling base unless you're a freak of nature
like
and
Brock Lesnar.
Division I champion who has 30 extra pounds on the competition.
That helps.
Yeah, I think when Lesnar actually fought Couture, style, like, from the weigh-ins, he had 40 pounds. I would say that Lesnar probably outweighed him by a good 60 pounds on the night of that fight.
Yeah, you know, it wasn't just like Anderson Silva Big Mac. It was like, hey, yo, let me get that cow, player.
So, I remember CM Punk getting signed, and I had really stopped watching wrestling. I'd turn on Raw maybe once a month, kind of catch it or catch a SmackDown.
Sure.
And I knew who he was. I knew he was enough of a voice that I said he's training with. He moved to Milwaukee. He was training with Ruva Sports, so guys like
Yes, too good.
Emmanuel Sanchez and Anthony Pettis and Sergio Pettis.
Yep.
Ben Askren, I think, was over there for a while. Really, I was excited that he was putting in the work, but I know they talked about him fighting. Like, they signed him in 2014. And his
Yes.
first fight didn't happen until September of 2016.
I think they were trying to pad it out, if that makes sense.
I think
they
so
were
too,
just
but I don't
trying to
think
get-
it worked. If he was
No,
25,
not at all.
if he was 25, that would have worked just fine.
Right. But it's he had to probably heal up all the nagging stuff he had first of
Oh,
all.
that's true. That's
And
true.
then it's a matter of, I really think they were like, we have another hypothetical Brock Lesnar coming that's going to bring all these wrestling nerds over from here to there.
Mm-hmm.
And it did. I mean, people paid for the fight. It's just more the fact that I think it was too late by that point. It's hard to train for that kind of thing. Like, I'm 35. I'm not going to go train for a UFC fight. That's ridiculous. So,
No.
and again, he was never a bigger guy. He was never really into any kind of sports that I can recall. So it's not like, again, a freak like Brock Lesnar.
Mhm.
I guarantee if you gave Lesnar like hockey pads, he'd be fine tomorrow. Like, he would figure it out. Like, whatever sport it is, he's gonna do it and do it well. It's just give him a minute and he'll be fine. So I think they were trying to like give him as much time to train and get ready as possible, and that's probably why it took so long. Is because they're like, we don't want to rush this, and then he's gonna get humiliated. But there you
And
go.
and the craziest part for me is that I was at UFC 203 where he made his debut. And right before he walked out, because there was the big talk, was he going to use Cult of Personality? Was he going to come out, be announced as CM Punk, or was he going to be Phil Brooks? And I just remember the lights in the entire arena went dark. And that music kicked on, and the hair on everybody. There was not a single person sitting in there when he walked out. Like, the electricity for that, and I've been to, dozens of fights. I've never seen or felt anything like that. So I even got sucked into, okay, maybe he's going to be able to do this. Maybe it's going to be... And I remember watching the fight and going, oh boy. No.
Mm-hmm.
This is bad.
That's like a short little tip. Let's say you were sitting there and Hogan was in his prime, and all of a sudden the lights went out and you heard, I am a real... Yo, you...
Yeah.
And then if he
Exactly.
came out and whooped some ass, you were like,
Mhm.
holy Perry Bolea, whoa! But, of course,
Yeah.
the magic is always there, but you have to be able to do it. It's,
And I hate that he wasn't able to. I know he ended up signing with Cage Fury, doing commentary, and I guess that was going really well. But it's just sometimes it's like Frank Mir towards the end of his career when he was, starting to lose a little bit. But then you listen to his commentary and you're like, this guy could narrate like water boiling, and I'd be like, okay, what happens next? So the water boil. Oh, okay. It's just the
Don't
way
get me
he
wrong.
explains things.
I'm sure he loves the sport.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure he does. It's just not everyone can do the sport, and that's basically what it comes down to. And
But you know what? He gets my respect for trying.
Of course, I respect him for trying. It's still a stupid plan, but I
Oh, yeah.
respect him for doing it. Again,
Like
if Dana White knocked on my door and said, "Hey, we want you to fight in 3 months," no, I'm good, thanks, because it's just a stupid plan, and I get after the first fight. Okay, you lost. That's the first fight. You were probably nervous. You probably just weren't in the zone yet. Okay, cool. But then when you lose the second fight,
The same
out
way.
of quickly,
Mhm.
and it's like
He
you're
went all
done.
3 rounds, but Dana also said that was one of the worst fights he's ever seen in his life. So
Yeah, which
Well-
probably isn't helping things either.
No.
Let's be honest with you.
That was
But-
before the Lasagna fight.
oh god. I think my favorite gif that came out of that entire thing was just him and Romero standing there, rocking
Yep.
back and forth, and it was like when you're trying to figure out the controls and one of your controller dies, and so they're just standing there like. Dun, 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 dun. But it did suck to see him because you saw Punk putting in all that effort. You saw everything he did with the sport. But like you said, I think the only guys that can really pull off the UFC career later are heavyweights. They're not having to cut the weight, and it just
could win with a punch. Yep.
So that beautifully segues us into, Dan the Beast Severn. The man who's been fighting for probably longer than all of us have been alive.
Come on.
It just blows my mind what he's been able to accomplish. And, if you look at his actual record now, I think he has 127 fights.
He's probably fighting right now.
No, I think this new
Nobody
time.
knows. No. But I guarantee if somebody challenged him, he's, okay, let's go. Like, go back to the school
Behind
gym.
closed doors.
He's going to go. Yeah.
So, Nick, I know you knew Dan Severn before he ever showed up in wrestling. Art
Yes.
was your first introduction to him. I know you said you watched some of the older UFCs on the pay-per-view. Didn't really...
I had seen him, but the thing that kind of it was the WAF that really got it. He came, I think it was Jim Cornette introduced him, and he was carrying like the NWA belt and like 7 other belts or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I had heard of him and seen him a little bit, but it's like, wow, that's a different kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's ultimately kind of what caused his issues in the WAF, if that makes sense. That introduction carrying all those belts, and then you never saw anything to, why does this guy have all these belts? That's the problem.
True.
No flash. Even with Shamrock, he was still angry and yelling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Severn was just a dude in a t-shirt.
True.
That's it. A really dangerous man.
Hell of a
in a t-shirt.
mustache. A hell of a
Oh,
mustache.
hell of a mustache. But
I think that mustache actually won some of those fights. It's like a Chuck Norris beard, like.
Yep. I'll tell you. You good? I'll give you my.
Yeah, I'm good. Go ahead.
I didn't want to butt in. Sorry. When he came in and I saw all the championships and accolades, I was like, "Yes, that's a great entrance for this guy. He is a better fighter than Shamrock at that time. More notoriety, and the problem was exactly like you said, Art. Here's a man who had all these accolades, and they gave him nothing in the WWF. But you know what? It's because they thought he had a personality, and they didn't. And when they put him on a mic, it was like, what the hell is happening? And he was hurting people, and he wasn't learning like Shamrock did.
No.
People were pissed at that.
And it's understandable. There's a couple matches I saw where he would wrestle The Rock or whoever it would be.
Oh, yeah.
And he would hurt. You could tell something's not right. Rock's getting hurt by this guy because he's throwing him and just not having any kind of like.
Nope, not a care in the world.
He had wrestled before too, but again, if like let's say there was a Paul Heyman or Jim Cornette was to be just his mouthpiece, and here's this dangerous killer dude over here, it would have worked. But they didn't really establish him.
No.
As anything, and that just that really hurts in the long run. You need a reason to care about this guy. Cool, he's got a lot of belts.
He said, I remember in a magazine, he said, and I forget the magazine. It was a wrestling magazine. It was a really good one. They rate the stars and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
He had said he came in to bring realism into wrestling, and he said he wasn't going to sugarcoat it or powder puff it, but he was hurting people. That's
the problem.
The golden rule. The reason why The Rock, Stone Cold worked with The Rock is because they kept each other safe. They didn't hurt each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The Rock, for example, Stone Cold never wrestled Owen Hart again because he freaking jacked his neck up.
It's understandable.
Yeah.
But like with Severn, he would have matches with guys that can pull good matches out of everybody, like Owen Hart, like every other guys, and he couldn't. There wasn't anything there.
Nope.
If you can't get a good match out of Owen Hart or Even
No
like D'Lo
rhythm.
Brown or anybody like that, you're done. There's
Yeah,
nothing
you're
to do.
done. Absolutely.
Well,
Yep.
you really look at what Lesnar does now with the suplexes. Like that was Dan Severn. Like that was
Yeah.
his thing, and I remember seeing the first time seeing somebody get German suplex, and you're like, holy shit.
Yeah, but that's supposed to happen.
Yeah. And I think
Yep.
was it the Dominic Cruz DJ fight where he German suplexed him?
Yeah.
And they were like,
3 times.
yeah,
But the first one looked good, then the second one was kind of like a side one, but they were still dope. And that was size advantage again.
Yeah.
They didn't have that little, weight class yet.
So, all right, sorry DJ, I see you up there.
Hey, we love you, DJ. You're a hell of a fighter. UFC should never let you go.
Nope,
But, if you're making more money, more power to you.
absolutely. I'm sure he's listening to this right now.
You never know.
We're gonna have
Never
one listener. It's just gonna be my mouth going, "Thank you." So talking about obviously the big four, because I feel like you could Google this article. Google the four main ones. For you, who's a standout that doesn't really get the recognition, but has well excelled, transitioning from one to the other? Like was not really is being talked about, but definitely has made more of a career now than what they were known for to begin with. Art's really thinking about this one.
I'm thinking. I'm trying to think of because I'm just gonna say Lesnar if I don't really think about it.
All right. You want me to go then?
Okay.
We'll have Nico, yeah.
Now, you said you wanted best people that came to MMA?
People
From MMA?
people who were known for what they were before and just far exceeded.
Okay, cool. All right. So Matt Riddle, of course.
Definitely.
He was a good fighter, and they cut him because of weed,
Mhm.
And it's like, look at Rob Van Dam. The guy's still wrestling. Why? Because of weed.
His TNA doesn't test
He
for
broke a man.
marijuana.
So he's great. His transition was fantastic. WWF is not pushing him, unfortunately, and didn't they cut him, right?
No, he's still working there. It's
I
the
think he's
problem is
NXT, yeah.
NXT, he's down.
he keeps talking shit about guys that are way over his pay grade, and that's
Of
not going to
course.
give
Like
you.
Goldberg?
You're not going to
But
get.
you know what?
Like Goldberg and Brock.
Because
and-
Goldberg's crap.
I agree with him, but that's not going to make the guy they're paying $2 million a year happy, and then
True.
they're not going to give
True.
him. They're not going to put a match because guess what? Goldberg's just going to squash him in
Yep.
probably 30 seconds. So it's
Um,
not. It's just kind of pointless.
Yeah. Shayna Baszler would be another one. She's had more success in the WWF than she ever had in her MMA career.
Well, and I think in her MMA career she was like 15-11. So
Yeah.
she had a lot of fights.
She had that momentum when she fought those one-dimensional female fighters, and when she got into the top level, and this second wave of fighters started coming out, like the Rouseys, etc., and all of that, it was just game over for her. And Ronda Rousey, of course, had a great transition too.
Yeah.
Brief touch in that because everybody knows that.
Yeah. And that's like saying Conor McGregor with MMA. You got people who have never watched a fight before, but people watched Ronda wrestle. And then they
Yep.
went, "Oh my god, she can't wrestle."
Yeah.
So with Shayna though, like she's really coming to her own. And I really felt like had everything going on in the world right now, because I'm not going to say it, I think she would have beat Becky. I think they would have pushed her, and I think it would have been interesting to see that, just because if you Google Shayna Baszler, it does not say MMA fighter first.
No.
It says wrestler.
Yep.
And I can't imagine she ever thought that was going to be a thing, but I think she's well adapted to it.
Absolutely.
Besides those two, is there one that you can think of?
There's one guy that I think if he had started earlier that popped into my head while we've been talking about this. Jack Swagger, right?
Yeah.
Jack Swagger would have been an amazing UFC guy if he had gone in, because he was a wrestler too. And this guy's huge. He's like 6'6" and like 270, something like that. And he had some like MMA fights and he did good, but he's getting old. But I think that's one that if he had gone a different direction would have been a lot better for him in the long run, because that guy is a monster. He's fast.
He's fighting in Bellator currently, and he's doing this stuff with AEW, right?
I think he's still like 33 or 34 years old. Like he's getting up there, and it's like you're not gonna last forever if you're doing it that way.
Believe it or not, I'm pretty sure he trains out of Ybor City. So
I'll have to talk to him and tell him this is a bad plan. Keep making that Jericho bodyguard money.
Oh,
Yep.
Probably making more, honestly.
I got a funny story about that. So my uncle's like a carpenter, and he never watched wrestling. Like he wrestled in high school, and like went through all that. And he has this job. He goes to the house, and he's doing the work, and it's Chris Jericho's house.
Nice.
And he's like, "Why do you have all this stuff on the wall?" And Jericho was like, "You don't know who I am?" And he's like, "No, should I?" I'm like,
I'm sure
like,
that's exactly what
this is in the last 10 years, so that's still like, oh my god. But it was
Jericho, freaking man.
Yeah, always, man. Made that little cameo in the Jay and Silent Bob reboot. If you haven't seen it, it is
everything.
hilarious.
Yeah, baby.
Look,
Fucking lion salt and lion tamer, official lion tamer. Knee in the back of the head and the neck.
Yep. I hated the Walls of Jericho. It's
Dungeon,
just
dungeon.
the Boston Crab.
Hell yeah. Being trained by Bret Hart and all them down there, and Stu.
Who's the one, obviously I'm not going to count Jack Swagger, but what one wrestler guy would you guys say probably would have had the best shot in MMA back in the day or whatever? Like a guy that didn't ever try it. I'm going with Bret Hart because, again, he was trained in the dungeon and learned how to stretch people and mess up people. So I think in the early UFC, he probably would have been
I think he would have been a good submission fighter. Hell yeah.
And he's a tough, like, fucking dude. Honestly.
I'd say, bro, you know who'd be crazy? I mean, going into WCW, just picking a dude. D. Malenko.
Oh, yeah.
Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
Man, in one of the lighter classes. Man, I'll put you in this. I'll put you in that. I'm doing this. I'm doing it like, ah!
Or, what's his name? Redacted. The crippler.
Oh, Ben
Redacted would have been great as a UFC guy. He probably would have lived longer, honestly.
True. Release anger and
Yeah.
who knows? Maybe. Possible.
But like guys like that like have that kind of determination and drive, I think could have figured it out and learned it and stuff like that. So I think, yeah.
So I'm going to throw this one out there because it just popped in my head. Do you think Triple H could have ever made it in MMA?
No.
Oh, hell no. Hunter Hearst Helmsley, get the hell out of here.
That'd be like the equivalent of me saying Lex Luger would work in UFC. It's
Sure,
not gonna work.
get his ass ripped up.
Yeah, it wouldn't have worked. Nope, it wouldn't have worked. Like
Scott Steiner.
like big. I know.
He had an attitude.
He
could
mess some people up, but at the same time, you get him down. I think it's a matter of he's done.
True.
He doesn't have the vertical base. Can't
No, he beat him out. It's like, come on. You've heard that. Oh, Haku. There we go.
Oh, Haku. Oh, he would have messed people up.
He would have killed somebody.
Or William Regal. I think William Regal would have done really good because he was a bare knuckle boxer when he was
off the drugs.
Yeah, if he was healthy
great.
and had his mind right, like he was fighting when he was a kid. He knows how to wrestle and stretch people, so I think he would have done good too.
True.
I like that I didn't have an answer for that one, and the one I did, you both were like, "Oh my god, no!"
No, Triple H.
it's just a thought because
he's a good wrestler, but the problem is like that doesn't translate all the time.
No, Joe Kowalski was never an MMA guy.
No, I don't think.
That's his trainer, so
yeah,
that's what we learned. Wrestling would be much better if we had that. If different people still taught wrestling, wrestling would be better. Not one whole group. Sorry.
No.
Everybody's the same. That's why I don't watch anymore because everybody's exactly the same. Who cares?
Yep.
There's no. I know everybody got trained in Orlando.
Yes, exactly.
Like that's it.
And I feel like the same thing with MMA. There's so many gyms now, and I feel like if the WWE took anything from the UFC, it's when a fighter cross trains. Go learn from this guy. I don't care if it's a leg drop, a clothesline, like something simple, but learn it and make it your own. And I feel like there's so many fighters who do that. Early days you stuck with the Lions Den. You stuck with, your team. You did not go anywhere else. You did not do any of that. So I feel like if wrestlers took that mentality, you probably would see more wrestlers transition to MMA. But I think at the end of the day, it's money.
it's money, but it's the way it was back in the day. I'll just pick a random name off the top of my head. Ric Flair. Ric Flair trained in Minnesota. I don't know why I think of Ric Flair.
No, you're good.
Ric Flair trained in Minnesota. And then he got sent down, let's say he got sent down to Florida. Then he went to North Carolina. Then they moved him over to Kansas City. And then they just had him on a loop. You'll learn something from Memphis. You'll learn something from whatever. So when you come back to North Carolina, you have a whole thing in your chest of stuff to pull out.
Yep.
And now, again, everyone gets trained in Orlando. That's all they ever do. And then you can't learn anything that way.
No.
You learn from, who is it? A-Train?
Hugh Morris. Hugh Morris can only teach so much.
Exactly. I saw him get squashed by Goldberg. I don't really trust his training skills.
Yes.
I went to a match in Tampa. It was Goldberg versus Hugh Morris. It was like 45 seconds. I was like, whoa, that was fast. And then I'm surprised Goldberg got him up, honestly, for the jackhammer. That's a lot to be moving around.
Yeah, true.
So for you, I'll ask Art what was the one wrestling match that you can remember that you'll never forget? Like something that's stuck in your mind. And then if you have an MMA match that's stuck in your mind as well.
I would say wrestling match-wise is still going to be Bret Hart versus Stone Cold Steve Austin for WrestleMania 13. The I Quit match where it ends with Bret winning because Bret always won. Steve never beat Bret. But I would say just because he has him in the sharpshooter. And when you got somebody in the sharpshooter, they don't get out of the sharpshooter.
Yeah.
And Stone Cold's bleeding and he just passes out. And the whole thing is Stone Cold doesn't know any submission moves. He's just going to beat the shit out of you until you quit. It's such a well-told match of Bret Hart dissecting a human being in front of you and Stone Cold just passing out. As far as UFC fights go, probably the one that sticks out in my mind the most, it was one, where was it? There was one I went to, I think I went with you guys, to the, I think it was the Wing House. It was the Brock Lesnar. I can't remember who he was fighting that night. Who was he fighting that night?
Was it the big...
Yeah.
Name,
Shane Carman.
Yeah, there we go. What was his real name? Oh, Jesus. I can't think of the actual name. That's what I was trying to think of.
I've never gotten more invested in a fight, whether it's wrestling, boxing, whatever, than I wanted that motherfucker to knock out Brock Lesnar. Just because Brock was doing his job and being a heel, but it's like, I want somebody to knock this man out. Just because there has to be somebody that can do this. And I thought he had a chance, and then, no.
Yeah.
So that's probably the one fight that sticks out the most in my mind, because I got caught up in it the most, I would say.
For me, for wrestling, it was actually Bret Hart versus Tom McGee. I'm kidding. That's a joke. Look it up, everybody, after you watch it. It's the worst match. Poor Bret Hart. No, but really, I would say what really stood out for me, and this was a bad reason at first, was that pay-per-view that night when Owen died. Thankfully, we never saw it, watching it on pay-per-view. But just the honesty coming from, like, Jerry the King Lawler, and, man, I mean, and Jim Ross having to say what happened, and then the wrestlers still going through that whole night of the pay-per-view. It showed me that, you know, even though they're putting on stories and a lot of these people are like superhuman in more than one way, they can, you know, tragic things happen. And it was like, whoa. Mm-hmm. And I still don't forget that. And what a horrible gimmick the Blue Blazer was.
I liked the Blue Blazer. But I liked it because it was so stupid for 1999. Because he was talking about saying your prayers, drinking your milk, and just to be a dork. And it's
For the UFC, hands down, it was when Mike Bisping won that title, baby.
UFC 199.
I mean, Jesus. there were so many people at that restaurant that were like, Bisling's gonna lose, just like he always does. And I was just like, I could see it in his eyes during all the pre-fight video doc.
Oh, you mean the 17 days?
Oh yeah, yeah.
17
One of the
days.
greatest, call-ups to a fight to win the title. I mean, and then like, oh, I'll touch you. I'm gonna touch you. Just, oh man, it was great.
That was a night I wish I bet on fights.
The way that and they would celebrate him, and that whole card on that fight, that pay-per-view was just off the wall. Almost every single fight.
Absolutely, and it's tough to pick one because there have been so many fights that you watch over the years, and there's so many wrestling matches. Like, I probably couldn't think of a wrestling match that I can remember. I remember watching The Undertaker throw Mankind off a cage. I remember that vividly, and going, he killed him, and just hearing Jim Ross go, "Oh my God, oh my God." I think for a fight, it was. I'm just gonna kind of redeem myself here. It was the BJ Penn Sean Shirk.
Oh yeah.
Because that to me, like, it was when I was first starting to get into it. The first live UFC event I watched was UFC 102, so
Nice.
2009, and I remember watching the older fights and seeing that fight and just going, "Holy crap!" Like, that fight, and then probably the first fight I can remember was Mike Brown and Uriah Faber.
Oh yeah.
And that pair of fights where Faber was supposed to win every time.
Broke his hands, used his elbows. I mean, his Muay Thai was sick in that.
Yeah. And
True.
it's just amazing because, like you said, there have been so many changes. So many different people that have tried and failed, or that have, taken the transition by the whole, we're just going to keep calling him the Freak from now on. He's not the Beast incarnate. We're just going to call him the Freak. Because you're right. I think if you put him in goalie, like put him in goalie in an NHL game, he'd be like, give me like 2 games. I got this.
Yeah, they'll figure it out. or hand him a baseball bat, and he's gonna nail homers. He's basically Bo Jackson, honestly. Like, no matter what sport you put him in, he's gonna excel just because he's that kind of an athlete. He has that kind of drive. Now he's getting old, and I think he doesn't care anymore because the checks are coming in. But if you gave him a challenge, I think he would crush it.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that note, gentlemen, I think we've hit the pinnacle of the conversation. I don't even know if that's the right terminology, but if anybody wants to fact check me, you know where to find us. Art, I want you to talk a little bit about your podcast. That I know you revamped it. Episode 1 dropped today. So talk a little bit about that and what's going on.
Okay, so I have a podcast that is called Art Palooza, the little things down here at the bottom. Basically, it is a movie review show, and I do it a little bit differently. What I do is I pull up a bunch of years on a random number generator from 1975 to 2019. Ooh. I take whatever year it is and then find a movie in that year to review it. Today's review was Night of the Comet. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's actually a really good movie. Like, I watched it.
Wait, like Meteor Man good, or like?
I like Meteor Man more, but that's a different kind of movie. This is actually if you go back and watch it, it actually holds up because it's a well-written, well-shot parody movie, basically, if that makes sense. The soundtrack's really good. Everything's really good. My episodes are only about a half hour long because I talk first about the year itself, what happened in 1984, what was popular, all that kind of stuff. And then the last bit is I recap the movie from the beginning to the end and then tell you my thoughts about it.
Did anything else interesting happen in 1984 for either one of you?
I was born. That was the coolest thing I would say that happened.
Nick too.
Hulk Hogan in the WWF, I believe. A lot of things happened in 1984. But I already picked the year for the next one. The next one is going to be 1997. So I'm going to see what I can find in 1997 and go off. There's a lot of good stuff. It's just finding something. But yeah, that's my podcast, Art Palooza. It'll be coming out every 2 weeks because I'm not doing this every week. Nope. I've done it before, and I don't need that kind of stress.
Yeah.
But, so next one will be out in 2 weeks, 1997. I'll figure it out from there.
All right. Well, gentlemen, first of all, thank you for taking the time.
Oh,
But
of
really,
course. Anytime.
we've both been able to, all three of us have been able to influence each other and cross sports. And Nick pointing at somebody right now, it's kind of funny. And I think the nostalgia and knowing, what we all grew up on, because we all grew up on wrestling. So being able to go to those local Punk Pro wrestling shows, giving a nice shout out to our buddies there, put on really good shows. And so I hope, just like with amateur MMA, those guys get the, stay safe and make their way up. And hopefully, we'll see a next generation of stars that are doing that crossover and making it more of a transitional thing more than just a permanent, like, I'm going to go to wrestling, start to MMA, start in MMA, go to wrestling. So hopefully, we see some more of that. So, Quiggin Out MMA podcast, episode 5, Nick Ramirez up top, Art Reese at the bottom. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Ha ha.